Shabbos Daf Mem Ches is a wide-ranging discussion of many different subjects, all squeezed into one daf, and one lead to the next in a chain of topics. We begin with a story about somebody who said something to somebody else about not insulating things, and then we refer to the next thing he told him, which is about squeezing cloths soaked with liquid on Shabbos. And then we have a discussion about whether the soft cotton that people use to fill up their cushions, whether or not it's muktzah. That takes us into a discussion of whether you're allowed to stuff that stuff into cushions or not. That takes us into a general discussion about finishing off kalim or clothing on Shabbos. That takes us to a discussion about different articles of clothing that are connected to each other. That takes us to a discussion of when connected things are considered one object as far as being makabel tumah or not being makabel tumah. So let's begin over here. The last thing that we saw yesterday in the daf was a discussion about one object being put on top of a heat source to keep it warm. So the Gemara here quotes a story where Rabbah and Rabbi Zera went to the house of the Reish Galusa, the head of the community in exile, and they saw that he had a servant who put a flask of water on top of a kettle that was hot. So Rabbah scolded him. He said it's the wrong thing to do. So Rabbi Zera said, why aren't you allowed to do that? We saw halacha that you're allowed to put one kettle on top of another kettle. So he said that's different. There, both the kettle on top and the one on the bottom are hot. So you're not heating anything up. All you're doing is keeping it warm. You're keeping the top one warm because of the bottom one. Over here, the top one is cold, or it's cool. If you put it on top of a kettle that's hot, it's going to end up heating to a point that it's forbidden. And that's why I said he's not allowed to do that. Now the Gemara goes on to the next thing that happened there. What happened was that he saw that the servant then spread a cloth over a barrel. So again he shouted at him and said, you're not allowed to do that. So again Rabbi Zera said, why are you shouting at him? What's wrong? So he said, wait and see. So he saw that he took the cloth off, and sure enough, it was soaked with wine, and he tried squeezing it out. And the Gemara doesn't say so, but you assume he stopped him. And he said, so you aren't allowed to squeeze liquids out of a cloth on Shabbos. That could be a tolda of schita, or it could be malabin. Schita is a tolda for dash. So Rabbi Zera asked, but how is that different than the case of the parvanka, which is a cloth which is designed to be put over bowls of water? So he answered, that's different. That you're allowed to do because people don't care when that gets wet or dirty and they won't squeeze it out. But this thing is not meant to be there, therefore people care and they squeeze it out. Okay, now we go back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah had mentioned that one of the things you're not allowed to insulate a pot with before Shabbos is moichin. Moichin are balls of soft material that people use to stuff cushions, pillows, blankets, mattresses, things like that. So now the Gemara wants to know, so this thing, is it muktzah or not? Now generally, the moichin are important. You wouldn't just use it for anything. You want it for your cushions. So if you just have these balls of soft material themselves, you wouldn't use it for anything else. So it would be muktzah. But here, you used it to insulate the pot, or you are trying to use it to insulate the pot. So if that's what you used it for, that's what you want to use it for, so now it's no longer meant to be put inside the cushion. So now, maybe it's not muktzah. The Gemara says no. Just because it didn't have straw to insulate the pot, so you decided to use the moichin, doesn't mean that you've given up on its valuable its intended purpose, which is much more valuable, and therefore it's still intended to be used to stuff cushions, and therefore it's still muktzah. Okay, now the Gemara has a potential raya to this. There's a brisa that says you're allowed to use for insulating a pot. You're allowed to use wool shearings. You're allowed to use mats of combed out wool. You're allowed to use strips of wool that is dyed purple, and you're allowed to use these soft stuffings. But the brisa ends off and it says, but it's muktzah. You're not allowed to move them. So the Gemara says, you see clearly that it is muktzah, even though it's used to insulate the pot. So the Gemara says, no, these are two different halachas here. It's telling you that you're allowed to use it as moichin, and it's telling you a totally separate thing. It happens to be that these things are generally muktzah, but it could be that the one you use to insulate the pot, once you use it to insulate the pot, then it's really not muktzah at all. Okay, now once we're discussing moichin, the Gemara goes to a different subject over here. The Gemara says that Rav Chizda allowed you to put the stuffing back in a pillow if it fell out. Now, this is similar to the discussion we had yesterday about finishing off a kli, making it useful, or any device, or any object. The halacha would be that you're not allowed to finish it. It could be a question of binyan b'kelim. Over here, it would be not binyan b'kelim. Here would be makah b'patish. You're making it useful, or told of that, called tikkun moneh, fixing it to put in a useful situation. So Rav Chisda said that you're allowed to put the stuffing back into the pillow. We didn't feel like that was a prohibition of makah b'patish or tikkun moneh, fixing the objects. And Mara says that they asked on him, Rav Chanan bar Chisda said, how could you do that? We have a brisa that has a list of things you're not allowed to do, and they are as follows. First of all, if you sent your shirt to the cleaners and they stitched the neck hole shut, you're not allowed to, you are allowed to untie the neck hole, but you're not allowed to rip a neck hole in the first place. Meaning when they would first weave a shirt, they didn't weave a hole for the neck. What they did was they wove it over straight, and then they cut a hole in it where you stuck your head through. So you're not allowed to cut that hole in the first place. Besides the malacha of tearing, it's also malacha of makah b'patish, because that's the last step you do in order to make the shirt wearable. Now the next thing that it says here is that you're not allowed to put the stuffing into a mattress or a pillow. You're not allowed to do any of these things on Yom Tov, and you're certainly not allowed to do them on Shabbos. So you see, you're not allowed to put the stuffing into the cushion. So Mara says, no, that's talking about a new one, where you're first filling it up with stuffing in the first place. There, you're finishing it off, and you're making it into a usable cushion that it wasn't before. Rav Chisda is talking about putting it back where it had fallen out. That's mutter. And we even have a brisa that says that you're not allowed to put stuffing into a mattress or a pillow on Yom Tov, certainly not on Shabbos. But if it fell out, you're allowed to put it back on Shabbos and certainly on Yom Tov. So here you see that you're allowed to put things back. It's not an issur of makah b'patish, only to first do it in the first place, you're not allowed to do. Okay, now, having discussed this, the Gemara goes into the subject of making the neck hole in a shirt for the first time on Shabbos. The Gemara says that anybody who opens that hole in the shirt has finished off the garment, and therefore he has done an issur d'oraisa. It's a carbon chatas. So Kahana asks how to understand. If you have a barrel of wine, you're allowed to chop off the lid. That's not called making the barrel into a usable object, finishing it off. So how come ripping off the edge of the clothing is called making it usable? Why is the barrel case permitted, and this shirt case, opening that hole, is forbidden? Either way, you're opening a hole to make it useful. So my answer is it's very different. Rava said, no, the barrel and its lid are not one object. They're two separate objects. The lid was made separately and it was cemented onto the barrel. The barrel is considered a useful object, even though it has a lid stuck on it. The barrel is a separate object. But here it's one shirt and you're ripping a hole. So that's, you're detaching something which is connected, which is part, it's one contiguous object. You're not just separating two separate items that are stuck together. That is permitted. But making a new hole where there wasn't one before, that is forbidden. Now, having mentioned connected objects, the Gemara goes into a whole nother topic, which is related to the issue of connected objects. The halacha is as follows. If you have two separate kalim, two separate objects, functional objects, one cannot make the other tamei. Only an ava tomo can make another kli, only an ava tomo can make a kli tamei, but one kli cannot make another kli tamei. The only way one kli is tamei and the other kli that's connected to it is also tamei is if their connection is so strong and so serious that we view them as one object. Then if one is tamei, the other one is, because it's really one object. So Gemara is going to try to discuss when are objects that are connected, disparate objects that are connected, when are they considered one, so that if one becomes tamei, the other is tamei automatically as they are one unit. So Gemara has two mishnayos which seem to be in contradiction to each other. One of them is talking about garments that are stitched together by launderers. Launderers would stitch clothing together in one long chain so that they wouldn't lose them when they washed them in the river. So on that, the Mishnah says that they are considered to be connected, they're considered to be one long object, and if one of them becomes tamei, they're all tamei because it's all considered one object. And that halacha is true during the washing, not during the washing. It stays that way until you start opening up the thread. And this is true even if the objects and the thread that's connecting them are shatnez. So they're certainly not going to stay together. Still, until you start disconnecting it even when the job is over, it's still considered to be one object, and it's tummy. However, we have a different Mishnah, which is discussing an axe head and the handle. And this is where you took a random piece of wood, you stuck it into an axe head, and you made it into an axe like that. So there, the Mishnah says, it's only considered one object, so that if one of the pieces becomes tummy, the whole thing is tummy. That's only true while you're using the axe with its handle. Once you stop using it, even if you didn't start taking it apart yet, then they're not considered connected anymore. So anyone wants to know, is a contradiction here. The contradiction is when it's not being used. When the axe head and its wooden handle are not being used, we say that they're separate things. Well, when the clothing are not being washed, they're supposed to be separate things. How come when it's not being washed, the washing is over, they are still considered to be connected? So the Gemara answers that the difference is as follows. Do you want them to stay connected or not? In the case of the axe, with a makeshift handle, as soon as you finish using it, you throw away the handle. Even if you haven't actually thrown it away yet, it's no longer important to you. However, the washer, who has all the clothing that he's washing stitched together, wants it to stay that way. Just in case it gets dirty again, he could wash it again. Now the Gemara goes deeper into the subject of separate objects that are connected. The Gemara says here, in this case of the washer, we saw that separate garments that are connected just for convenience is considered to be one object, and if one of them becomes tummy, they all become tummy. So who's the Tana who holds that way? So the Gemara says that Tana must be Rabbi Meir. And the Gemara quotes a machlokes between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Shimon, which the Gemara will then analyze more deeply. So the case is concerning a kira, a stove, which again is a clay device, which is pretty much shaped like a pot. There was a fire that burned at the bottom, and you put a pot on top of it on its rim. Now there were various devices that they would put on the side, they would connect to the side of this stove, this clay thing, that were useful. It's convenient to have them there. There was a holder where you could keep oil, there was a holder where you could keep light, so you could see what you're doing, there was a holder you could keep spices. These were all convenient things that were attached onto the kira, the stove itself. So all these devices, Rabbi Shimon holds, they're separate. They're not considered to be one, and if one of them becomes tummy, the rest of them are still tahar. So that doesn't fit with this washer case. The one who holds like the washer case, that's Rabbi Meir, who says that they are tummy. If one of them becomes tummy, they all become tummy, and therefore that's like the case of the washer. But now the Gemara says, if we look a little bit more deeply over here, Rabbi Meir doesn't say that all types of tumah apply from one to the other. There's two different ways. All these kelim are all made out of cheres, they're clay, and there are different ways in which clay can contract tumah, can become tummy. One way is that if it's touched on the inside by tumah, and another way is if there's just a tummy object in its airspace that doesn't actually touch it. It's just within the hollow of the kli. So Rabbi Meir has a differentiation as far as the halacha concerning how the clay object became tummy. How did the stove or the other object that's connected to it, how did they become tummy? If it became tummy through contact with a tummy object, so then all the pieces that are connected to it are all tummy. They're all considered one and they transfer. However, if it became tummy through a tummy object in its airspace, then it doesn't transfer from one to the other, and only the one that had the tummy thing in its airspace is tummy. The other things that are connected to it are not. Says, how could that be? If it's considered connected, so then they should all be, whether it's through tumah through touching or through tumah through airspace. If it's not connected, so then it should all be not. That shouldn't matter. How does it make sense that there's a difference between how it becomes tummy? So the Gemara answers that midaraisa, they do not become tummy. It's only midrabanan. The Rabbanan invented this tumah, and the Rabbanan only made it tummy in a case of contact and not airspace, so that you should keep in mind, you should remember that it's not tamei d'oraisa, and therefore if because of this tama some truma ends up becoming tamei, you won't burn the truma, you'll just leave it, because you can't burn truma unless it's tamei d'oraisa. Now the Gemara has another similar discussion. When you have connected objects, not only does tumah touching one make the other one a tummy because it's all considered one object, but when you sprinkle it with the paraduma water, if you sprinkle on just one, it's considered like you sprinkled on the whole thing, because again, they're considered to be one object. But the Gemara has an exception to this. There's a price that says if you have a pair of scissors that is disassemblable, they come apart, the blades come apart, or you have a razor that's used for smoothing furniture, and the blade and the wooden handle come apart, So they're considered to be, so the blade and the handle and the two parts of the scissors work as follows. They're considered to be connected so that if one of them becomes tamei, they all become tamei, but they're not considered connected so that if you sprinkle paraduma on water on one, it doesn't purify the whole thing. So how does that make sense? If it's connected, it's connected. If it's not connected, then it's not connected. How could you split the halacha? Gemara says that because it's as follows. Midaraisa, the halacha is that as while you're using them, they're considered to be connected, and when you're not using them, they're not connected. But the Rabbanan made a gzeira l'chumra both ways. Because they were afraid you would confuse using them and not using them, they said as far as tumah, we have to consider them connected at all times, whether you're using them or not, so that we're machmer and that it's tamei. As far as sprinkling, we have to consider them not connected at all times, so that you shouldn't confuse the halacha, and that when it's not connected or connected, we would consider it not connected, and therefore the sprinkling doesn't work for both, it only works for one.